Right, thank you so much for coming to the CommonSpace Monthly Forum. We're doing this at the last Thursday of every month at the Cannon Park Complex, so thank you for hosting us. For those of you who don't know, CommonSpace is a Scottish digital media site, part of the wider Commonweal Group, and it's funded by grassroots support and donations. If you want to know what's really going on in Scotland and beyond, I'd encourage you to sign up as a subscriber at CommonSpace. We've got sign-up sheets at the front, get your name, email, and we'll keep you up to date with all the exclusive stories we've reported on and announce future events. We're also really keen on hearing your idea about future events. So if you've got any ideas, speak to the team after this or send us an email. So I'm Tiffany Kane, I'm Operations Manager at the think tank Commonweal, and I'm going to be the chair tonight. This event about national self-determination movements comes at a time when the issue of national autonomy and independence is probably being debated more now than it has in a very long time. Of course, we've had the Scottish independence referendum in 2014 and the Catalan referendum in 2017. But the issue of Ireland has also been raised again by the Brexit crisis. The Kurdish revolution has put the issue of Kurdish rights on the global stage again. And the issue of Palestine and Israel remains at the forefront of the global struggle against oppression and occupation. But very rarely are all these issues about the rights of nations thought about and discussed together. And very rarely do the activists leading in these movements share experiences and ideas and think about what they can really learn from one another. That's really the essence of internationalism, to learn from and show solidarity with one another's struggles. And that's why CommonSpace have organised this event tonight. So, the way tonight is going to go, I'm going to introduce our panel, and then I'm going to ask each speaker a few questions, and then we're going to keep it open and relaxed. You can jump in with each other's questions as you please. And then about 8:30, we're going to open it up to the floor and we'll do Q&As. So please get your questions ready. Okay, so, sorry for pronunciation. So tonight we have Wael Shawish from the Scottish Palestinian Society and Scottish Friends of Palestine, Rosa Salih, activist and campaigner with Scottish Solidarity with Kurdistan, and Oriel Rogbaliskia from Catalan National Assembly ANC Scotland. And apologies from Franny McAdam from Friends of Ireland, who unfortunately couldn't make it tonight because of an illness. Right, Oriel, can I start with you?
Aye, sure.
So obviously the issue of the right to national self-determination is really important in the context of the current Catalan constitutional crisis. Do you think the suppression of the referendum in 2017 and the lack of a response from the EU and other countries shows that right isn't respected?
Yes, I definitely think that what I'm sure we all saw that happened the 1st of October of 2017 when the police came to attack literally peaceful voters that were there in the polling stations just wanting to do what is their right, what is all right of every citizen to vote, shows that Spain has no respect whatsoever for that right. And what you were saying, the lack of response of all European countries, is that I would say of most of world countries, but especially Europe. That's Europe, it should be, it was built to have a peaceful area where rights were respected. And in the Catalan case, as in many other cases, we are seeing that this is not respected at all. And this is, for me at least, very worrying to see how Europe, not only with the Catalan crisis, but as well, if I can say, with other countries' crisis, and with all the refugee crisis, it's showing it is not respecting at all human rights, as is, in my case, and what I'm here for, the democratic right to vote and to decide your territory's own future. That's it.
Thank you. Rosa, the Kurdish movement is a really women-centred movement and advocates autonomy of Kurdistan but not independence. Can you explain to us a bit more about the ideas of the Kurdish movement?
So the Kurdish struggle or movement is very complex because there's not only one state in question, there's 4 states that are surrounding the Kurdish people. So we're 40 million Kurdish people with our state. The south of Kurdistan really they've had a referendum very similar to Catalan in 2017. They had their own referendum and 93% of the people voted really in favour of independence. However, in Europe we didn't get a lot of coverage, I have to say, but maybe that's because we are in the Middle East and really we don't receive the attention that we most likely would want to receive, especially because we're not in EU countries. However, Turkey is one of those countries that is seeking and fighting to be in EU, become a part of the EU countries. However, the Kurdish people are in south of Kurdistan. There's been a referendum, and as I said, it's very complex because the Kurdish people in the north of Kurdistan and the east of Kurdistan, so that is the north of Syria and the south of Turkey, that's where the Kurdish people are placed. They are seeking democratic federalism. So it's really different to what they want to receive in the south of Kurdistan is independence. So they are seeking more likely kind of the nationalism is more to become a state. However, the Kurdish people, self-determination has been a really difficult task for the Kurdish people because we have suffered so much and we have had endless conflict, you name it, Persian and Ottoman empires, Anglo-French imperialism, oppression of in the Iran and Iraq war. We suffered the chemical gas of under the Saddam Hussein regime, and the genocide of the Yazidis we've seen from Daesh just recently, and we've seen the Turkish state curfews on towns, on deaths of hundreds, people being dragged with cars. Really, the people have been literally killed, and that is something that there is no democracy really. And we've seen in 2018, the recent attack was on the Kurdish people in Afrin, which was in Syria, and really the Kurdish people being misplaced. They've just been kicked out of their homes, and they have nowhere to go to seek safety in other cities in Syria. To be honest with you, the attention to the Kurdish issue has been really low internationally, and the Kurdish movement is it's a very complex issue. Many people are not even aware of even Kurdish people exist in these states. People they've talked about Syria or like the Syrian refugees, and not many people have talked about Kurdish people. And the Kurdish people, especially the boy who drowned, was a Kurd. And I think a lot of media attention came to Alan Kurdi, but really the Kurdish people, I think, still needs time for really to bring attention to the international community to really understand what the Kurdish people have suffered. And until today, we are fighting just for our identity, really, to speak Kurdish language. Turkey is not even allowing the Kurdish people to self-identify themselves as Kurds. So it's a very complex case, I would say.
Mm-hmm. I was going to come to this later on, but I suppose because you mentioned it, what could we be doing as activists in Scotland to help raise awareness of this issue?
I mean, as I said, I haven't. The problem is as we know, a lot of attention came to the Kurdish issue just after, the Kurdish people fought Daesh, and the people kind of are aware of that. We are great fighters. The Kurdish people are really good fighters, and we have defeated ISIS. And it's been with our friends, the Arabs, the Assyrians. Many other people have joined the Kurdish people. It's just not the Kurdish people in Syria. I like to kind of mention that, but it is, as I mentioned, it's very complex. But the democratic confederalism is a system of direct democracy, and which was found on kind of villages and neighborhoods making decisions, grassroots decisions. So I like to speak more about democratic confederalism if there is, and then I'll come back to that question if that's fine with everybody. To be honest with you, there needs to be understanding of democratic confederalism, because it's different. It's the concept of democratic confederalism is being put forward by the political and ideology of Abdullah Öcalan. He is the leader of the PKK. Unfortunately, until today, he's been imprisoned by the Turkish state, and that is now 20 years he has been imprisoned. And I'll come back to your question, because many people at the moment are on hunger strike, and they want the freedom of Öcalan, and they think that he has suffered enough. And currently he cannot see his lawyer, he cannot see his relatives and families. An island is being created just for his imprisonment by the Turkish state. So really the isolation, it's really, it's against human rights. And really the international community have been silent on his treatment. And I think the hunger strike at the moment, there's a guy in Wales, he's on a hunger strike for 150 days or more. There are over 700 people are on hunger strike at the moment throughout around the world. And they like to bring attention to really Abdullah Öcalan's isolation. So in Scotland we could do more. Kurdish people have been demonstrating. They're asking the Scottish Parliament to speak up about the Kurdish struggle, especially imprisonment of Abdullah Öcalan, as we know that the trade union are asking for his freedom, and the trade union has been in forefront asking for better treatment of Öcalan. So really the Scottish Parliament and people in Scotland could do more in kind of bringing attention to his imprisonment. So I think in the Welsh Assembly there was a motion passed in Parliament in support of it. In Scotland yet this to come forward, so maybe something that we're hoping for.
Definitely. Wael.
Hello.
Palestine is obviously its own unique case in that it's illegally occupied by Israel and the settlements grow every year. Can you briefly explain that history and explain what the right to national self-determination means in the context of Palestine and Israel?
Sure. First, thank you for inviting me to this debate. I hope people will go away with something new from the discussions. The history of Palestine and Israel is really complex and yet so simple. 2,000 years ago, there was a Jewish people in Palestine. For some reason, they disappeared. Life went on. Christianity came in, Islam came in. People now in Palestine are either Muslims or Christians. We had Jews in Palestine until 1948, when the State of Israel was created. Following anti-Semitism in Europe, Jewish leaders in the European countries decided that the best thing for them is to have their own state, and decided that historically, having come from the area of Palestine, then that's where they feel they belong and started immigrating to Palestine until 1948 when the state was created. They didn't take over all of Palestine, they only took 78% of it via a very fierce war. And 22% of the land is now what is called Gaza and the West Bank. More than half of the Palestinians, as a result of that war, end up being refugees in neighboring countries, and they are still refugees today after 70 odd years since that war. Most of the Jewish people who are now in Palestine, between brackets Israel, probably 70+% are born in that place. So even though their parents, grandparents maybe came from Europe or elsewhere, many Arab Jews who ended up in Palestine, about 1948, I think there was about 800,000 of them, that now maybe make up about 30–40% of the population who came from Arab countries that were Jews, Tunisia, Morocco, Egypt, Syria. So most of the people who are now there are actually born in that land. Most of them believe, whether it's because of the historical religious promised land that God gave them, the land for the Jewish people, which I don't believe in. No matter what God said, I belong there, and whether He likes it or not, I belong there as well. So they believe that they belong there. The fact that they were born there, most of them, gives them a case to be there, but that doesn't give them the self-determination that we are denied. So Israel had its own self-determination, they have their own country. We are denied that right. We cannot exercise it, not only because of the occupation, but also because of the diaspora Palestinians. How can you have self-determination when half of the population are not able to take part in that process? And there is about 15% of the Palestinians who are actually Israeli citizens who cannot take part in any self-determination process. So our case with self-determination that is really based on nationalism does not exist in the same sense that other people have that need or that kind of dream of determining their own destiny. We tried nationalism back in the 60s and 70s, that really, because also being part of the Arab world, nationalism is a wider concept than just Palestine. So it's got 22 Arab countries that see nationalism as a one thing. So that actually harms our case, because Israel claims that we are Arabs and we have 22 Arab countries to go to, we don't need to be there. Again, it's a crazy idea that just because there are God knows how many European countries, then the Scots can go and live somewhere else and leave it to the English. That's the mentality of these 22 Arab countries where Palestinians can live in, which is, again, nobody in the West challenged that concept. We do. So really, when we talk about self-determination, I don't see it as a snapshot election process. Because it can't happen, not to mention the fact that I don't believe referendums or elections can be just. They can be democratic, but if we take the Scottish case, for instance, 45% said they wanted independence, 55% said they didn't want independence. The 45% right has been denied. So how does that work when 45% of the population don't have a say in having independence, having a completely different way of living? So it's really, I see self-determination as a process of achieving human rights and being equal across the board with whoever else is there, and then move on as a final stage to that process of being independent, if that's what the country wants to be. And Scotland is doing a good job of that. I mean, because we've got the Scottish Parliament, we've got our own legal system, we've got our own National Health Service, we've got our own education system. So in a way, Scotland is moving in the process of independence, but in stages, bit by bit, the political issue on a wider stage of where the politics and stuff like that comes in. But as far as the process going, that's the process I would like for Palestine, is where we go into a stage-by-stage process, building on human rights achievements and getting to a point where we're actually as equals as everybody else. If we take the issue of Palestine with self-determination as a one-off, for us as Palestinians, we want it all. We want all of Palestine, 48, before 48 and after 40, because that's where we believe we belong. The refugees who live in exile, they all came from what is now Israel. If we give them self-determination, as we call it, then they have the right to live in that country. But can their right be achieved at the expense of those who are born there that don't happen to be Palestinians? So I could be shot for that, for saying this, but that's the fact. And the fact is that we cannot have a solution in Palestine where it's one side or the other. We have to do that, both sides, to get together and work on being equal before we can have the final stage of what we want to do with our future. And that takes time. We could have done that over the last 25 years since Oslo started. Our politicians have failed miserably on both sides to actually bring people together instead of having openness and getting ourselves to interact and become equal. We build walls, or Israel build walls where we can actually see each other, never mind communicating and engaging. Israelis and Palestinians are on either side of these walls. And whatever our politicians tell us about what the other side is like, there are the monsters on the other side, and maybe there are monsters, but we don't see them. And the Israelis are telling their population that the Palestinians on this side of the wall are also monsters, and we have to protect ourselves. So that politicians playing with our future, with our children's future, is what we as individuals are failing to cut off. We need to get the politicians cut off, have populist movements where we can actually work on achieving our human rights by force if need be, but we have to do that. We have to get our human rights before we talk about, do we need one country or two countries? Is it one state, two states? All these things are not going to achieve anything unless we have that level of equality that would enable us then to move forward with no loss position. Because if you talk about it now for Israelis, give the Palestinians something, well, that's ours. Why should we give it to we have the force, we have the power to keep it, so we'll not give it to them. And the world is behind us on that. Because of, anti-Semitism, and Europe doesn't want the Jews back, or whatever it is. There is that, it's mine and I'll keep it because I can, even though you claim it to be yours, they can't do it. So we're not getting anything while being separate in terms of getting anything to share. If we can share our future together, we share our daily lives together, then maybe at one point we will forget that we are Jews or Christians or Muslims and start treating each other as human beings.
Absolutely. Oreo. Yeah. The Spanish elections are this Sunday coming. Catalonia has been at the centre of the election debate. What are you expecting from the elections, and could the limited power that Catalonia has currently been under threat from a new Scottish government?
Hi. I would like to start first putting those elections, in the incoming elections this Sunday, in context. Those elections are snap elections. 1 year ago, we had a conservative Spanish government, Partido Popular, the Popular Party, but the Spanish Labour Party presented a censorship motion against this government. They won, so they got into power. We had Pedro Sánchez, the leader of PSOE, the Labour Spanish Party. But well, just to say that it proved impossible for them to continue because, of course, they had problems with the numbers in parliament. So he was forced to go for those snap elections. and those snap elections are the ones happening just this Sunday, 20th of April. Thing is, the Spanish Parliament is very particulated in parties. I was just counting now. We have 12 different parties in the Spanish Parliament, and it's possible that 2 or 3 more parties are coming now that are going to be new parties. Of all those parties, there are 3, and I'll go now to the question, that are right-wing. They are all right-wing. One of them, called Vox, is far right. It's fascist, openly fascist party. They remember about Frankism. They remember, you know, all what they call the Spanish glory, and they are against women's rights. They are against, of course, refugees. They are even saying that they want to make a law to allow people to wear guns, to carry guns, right? To carry guns around. And so this is kind of one party that it seems that they will enter and get for the first time since Franco. We will have fascism in the Spanish Congress. So of those 3 parties, they are all, the 3 of them, one of them the Conservative Party that they were governing 1 year ago, the Partido Popular, they are talking about implementing again Article 155 of the Spanish Constitution. This article, if you remember, since the end of 2017 until mid-2018 more or less, it was being applied by the Spanish government. What this article of the Spanish Constitution allows is for Catalonia to be under direct rule from Madrid. So it de facto cancels the Catalan autonomy that we have. Everything is decided from Madrid, so we have no government, we have no parliament, everything is under direct rule from Madrid. There are 3 parties now that on those elections are talking about putting this article in game again. So this article was being applied. It was removed after the new Catalan elections on the 21st December 2017. That independentists won again. They had a majority of seats. But well, it was finally removed. But now those 3 parties are talking to put into game again this article of the Spanish Constitution. And this is very worrying because what they are saying is actually to just cancel Catalan autonomy, cancel Catalan government, to say that we have no right to have a parliament, to have no institutions that represent us, apart from the councils, of course. So yes, I'm worried that if they get a majority, they will form a government. And this is worrying because of the situation in Catalonia, and as well, of course, as I was saying before, that this will enable the far right, a fascist party, to maybe enter government, maybe from the outside, but giving support to the government. And well, yeah, the situation now is very complicated. On the other hand, though, it seems that Catalan parties will get stronger as a whole. So we'll have more force there in the Spanish Congress. There are two Catalan parties in the Spanish Congress, apart from the branches of all the Spanish parties in Catalonia, 2 only Catalan parties in the Spanish Congress. It seems that a third one might get in again. Well, again, no, so for the first time we'll have another third party representing all those 3 from the center-right to the far left, let's say. And so yeah, it's very worrying, but as well, we are hoping that this will really change a lot of things, those elections coming now this Sunday. And just as a final note, I won't be able to vote because for some reason I asked the Spanish consulate in Edinburgh that I wanted to vote from here, but at some point my vote has been lost. So I think I still have until tomorrow at 2 p.m. to receive it. I'm hoping that I will receive it because, of course, I do want to vote, because I really believe that a stronger representation of Catalan political forces in the Spanish Congress might help our cause. And as you all know, our cause right now is very, very difficult. We have people in prison, 9 people being held in prison, being tried just today. Today they were being tried. They've been in trial for 2 months now, and it will last at least for a couple months more. we have as well people in exile, as you all well know. One of them is here in Scotland, Clara Ponsatí, former education minister of the Catalan government, is now in St. Andrews. But as well, we have people in Brussels, we have people in Switzerland, and that, so the situation right now is of full repression against Catalan people, and is that they are threatening even with more repression. So the outcome of these elections will be very important.
What to take Rosa, so Turkish authoritarian nationalism has been growing partly as a reaction to the Kurdish revolution. Do you think there's any comparison to be made between Turkish nationalism, British nationalism and Spanish nationalism and their reaction to independence and autonomy movements?
Well, I mean, they all have similarities to each other, haven't they? They all believe in one state, one flag, one nation, one language, probably. So they're all similar in a way, and they're not giving the people the right of self-determination. So I agree they have similarities, and they are not allowing the people really to have their free will and self-determination and not be ruled by authoritarian countries. So yes. In Turkey, since the Kurdish revolution, or the Kurdish people have really kind of self-identified themselves, who they are, they understand their own history, and they've won, the HDP party have won a number of MPs elected to Turkish parliament. So really that self-identity have scared Turkish state in a way, and that's why they are really going against the Kurdish people, and I feel like that's why the violence has kind of started, and Erdogan believes that the Kurdish people will vote for his own party, and since that he has realized the Kurdish people are more really a democratic people, they accept LGBT rights, they accept women's rights, and I think it's very important to mention women's rights. Women's rights has been in the center of the Kurdish movement in the Kurdish region and the Middle East. And it's a hopeful beacon for all the countries around us to really appreciate women and really understand the free will of women. And a woman can be involved in all spheres of society, because you cannot have a revolution and you cannot have a self-determination after you ignore half of the population. So therefore, for society to be free, there needs to be a liberation of women. And I think that's why I believe in the Kurdish movement, and I believe it will bring hope for so many countries also around the Middle East, to believe in direct democracy, to believe in assembly, to believe in citizens' assembly. And I think in the democratic confederalism, it really talks about how women are, they have put this in practice in Rojava. We can see it. When you have a meeting, there's always a co-chair. There needs to be a woman and a man in every meeting. In every committees and assemblies in society, there's a man and a woman present. There's assemblies for young people, there's assemblies for women. You can just see in practice how direct democracy is working in north of Syria. The people have created this society themselves. So really, it's really empowering for me to see this kind of practice of society. It's possible, and how other maybe countries can learn and implement that, because Turkish state is very afraid of how the revolution has grown, how grassroots direct democracy is actually working, because really Turkey does not want this to happen, and that's why it's using all its military, it's using all power to shut the Kurdish movement. And I think we've seen in the past, we've seen in history, it's inevitable. Even if they do anything, the Kurdish people have shown time and time. We've defeated Saddam Hussein. No one thought that Saddam Hussein will ever be removed. No one thought that nothing will happen to him and his family. We've seen what happened to him and all of his family, some of them, especially his sons, and how they were killed, and how really tyranny will not go on. And I think that's what Erdogan needs to learn and really needs to change. Otherwise, the same thing will be his future.
Of course.
Well, you were talking about Spanish nationalism, just related to what I was answering before. In Spain, we've seen how this Spanish nationalism, because of all the Catalan crisis, has grown and it has now developed into this far-right party that I was mentioning before, that might enter the Spanish Congress. So I think it's a very dangerous thing. When Rosa was saying we have this kind of nationalism of one state, one flag, one language, that is self-imposing, in that, well, the state really imposes to all regions without accepting that every region might be different from one another. In Spain, this is the case. Every region is different, it has its own characteristics. And this is what, for me, I think enriches really a country state, not that thing of just one state, one flag. That was, in fact, one of Franco's phrases, to have just that, what España una grande y libre, which means Spain one, big and free, but being it Spain one, not many, as it should be.
Mm-hmm. I was going to ask, so I think you were alluding to this earlier, Netanyahu and Trump appear to be trying to kill off the idea of a two-state solution in Palestine and Israel. What do Palestinians think is the best strategy now, a two-state or a one-state solution?
Yeah, it's a difficult question.
Yeah.
Sorry. Well, I don't really want to talk about Trump much. He is not somebody that one can actually refer to with any kind of liability. So he is now putting both his country and even the United Nations at the disposal of Israel in terms of international law, and ignoring international law in a way, by acknowledging Jerusalem as capital of Israel, supporting the annexation of the Golan Heights in Syria. All these things, any self-respecting leader would say we need to change the international law to be able to do what we want, rather than just do what we want and ignore international law. So in terms of Trump, I think that's not really a reference that one can use. Netanyahu is a different story. Netanyahu is a leader of a state that is being oppressive. He doesn't want a two-state solution. He doesn't want one-state solution. He doesn't want any Palestinians there at all. He wants Palestinians out in one way or another. In effect, the ethnic cleansing strategy is not a Netanyahu strategy. It's a strategy of every Israeli leader that has been there since 1948. There is an ethnic cleansing process on the go. If I take my own case, I was in a class of 37 people at school. That was, don't do any maths, 40 years ago, okay? There is only 7 of us still in Jerusalem. 30 are in either exile, self-exile, forced exile, whatever it is. 30 of us are out. I see people today coming from Gaza to study. Most of them don't return. Now, that is not because they choose to live outside Palestine because they don't like to be there. That's because they don't see any future there. They don't see any way that they can actually live a normal life with their children or their families there. So, and most of us, I wasn't allowed to go back. I wasn't even an activist. I wasn't even involved in politics when I was told I was not allowed to go back after I finished my degree in the UK. So there is ethnic cleansing in many forms. Gaza itself, as we see it today, is the siege on Gaza is an ethnic cleansing siege. They want people out, so they suffocate them to the point of them, as soon as there is an opening, they will be out because they can't actually take the pressure anymore. They don't want Gaza, they don't want the West Bank, they want people to be put into corners where that corner will be managed, and then as soon as somebody can get out, they let them out. They don't allow people to build in the vast majority of Palestinian land in the West Bank. So that people, when they have their family growing, to find a place to live, you have to go into the centers where there are high level of populations, and that's where they want people to be, in that small and densely populated areas, and leave the land and the agricultural part of it empty. So nobody is allowed to build any houses in these, what they call Area C, which is the majority of the land in the West Bank. They don't allow people to build in East Jerusalem, where the majority of people are Palestinians, because they want Jerusalem to be unified Jewish capital with no Palestinians in it. So if you are not allowed to build, you actually move out to where you can build, and that's in the Area A of the West Bank. If you want to marry somebody from the West Bank, you are not allowed to bring her in with you to Jerusalem. You have to go and live with her in the West Bank. So ethnic cleansing. If you want to have a job and you can't find one in Jerusalem and you go and work in the West Bank, you lose your right to live in East Jerusalem, so that's another part of ethnic cleansing of Jerusalem. So you leave and you go and live in the West Bank. So Netanyahu and his life, with all the Israeli leaders, they don't want the Palestinians there, and they have a very wrong, whether written strategy or understood strategy, of emptying the land of Palestinians. And they are prepared to wait 50 years, 100 years for that to happen. Our role is to encourage people to stay where they are and to find whatever way they can make a living where they are, with the hardship that it is, to allow things to move a little bit on the easier side of life. I personally believe that engagement with Israeli activists who believe in equality is the way forward for us, because it's not about politics. For us, it's about being able to live where we belong. That's not politics, that's human rights. That's really an element of being where you need to be, bring up your children where you feel they belong, and be equal to whoever is there. I don't care what religion anybody is. I really don't. I mean, I can't say I want a Palestinian Palestine with only Christians and Muslims when I live in Scotland and fight for my right in Scotland to be equal to the Scottish people. You can't be two things in one time. I believe in equal rights to all in Scotland and equally in Palestine. So if my neighbor happens to be Jewish and equal to me, I'm happy with that. I don't have a problem with my neighbor being Jewish. I don't have a problem with my friends and neighbors being Christians, because I, a Muslim born, went to a Catholic school, and most of my friends are Christians. There's no problem, because as Palestinians, we see ourselves as equals. So it's really Netanyahu is a hardline nationalist, self-centered, egomaniac man, what Israel decided to have as a prime minister, who is doing the cause of Palestinians a bit of benefit, actually, because the world can see what Israel is doing. With people before him, I mean, most probably people here don't remember when a Labour Party governed Israel, and we had Shimon Peres he was an artist of the sea. He made the world feel that Israel wanted peace and were working on it, and the world was following him in a 25-year journey of going nowhere, with a peace process that has been a failed process from day one, because it didn't have an end product that would be acceptable to either side. So having somebody who is straight in your face, telling you it is as it is, we want it all, it's ours, as Netanyahu does, is actually opening the eyes of people in the West and everywhere else where they do have an influence on politics in the Middle East, to see what Israel is like and to fight with Palestinians to achieve human rights, and Israeli human rights activists as well, to achieve human rights for all, where then the process of change will lead to a country that hopefully will be a country for all.
Okay, I'm conscious of time and I always get around for going over time, so we'll try to be strict tonight. Will we open it up for Q&As and get some questions out, folks? Any questions for the panel? Yes.
I would like to just say, I'd like them all to communicate all together as one, not just as a whole pack, just as one or two, just for them to get there when they want to get there, do what they want to do, and go on with their lives. Simple, just go on with your lives, be as one, or two, or three, or four.
It's a good philosophy, and we definitely should aim for that, yes. Yes?
Would you say there's anything that unifies your causes in different parts of the world? Is there any sort of, is there anything that unifies you as separatists and nationalists?
Really, like, we're all people by the end of the day, and we're all humans, and we all want to have a normal life as well, and really not come here and talk about self-determination. We want to be as normal, because I think it's very also hard for us to be an activist and talk about these issues. We are over here, we want to have a normal life. You know, we all have a baggage with us that we feel like responsible to speak up about the truth and speak about the inhumanity that has faced our people back home, because we feel responsible in a way to speak about what's happening back home. So I think that's what we have similarities, I would say, and it's very hard to be an activist, and because I came to this country as a refugee, and I've kind of known about my people when I was really at university, when I was writing my dissertation about Kurdish people. I didn't know much about my history at all, and I learned from books. In Strathclyde University libraries, I was reading books about where I come from and who am I and why I've came to this country. I used to ask a lot of questions from my parents, and really the struggles we've gone through it's very traumatizing in a way as well, because psychologically sometimes I'm like, maybe I'm not well, something is going on, but it's we have a baggage on us, and it's very, very hard, and we're trying to have a normal life as well at the same time. But I would say the similarities would be that we are all fighting for our people, and we believe that our people deserve human rights. That's all we are asking for, is that human rights. And at the moment, the international community or the international law is not protecting our people. So that maybe it's an institution internationally that it's not protecting us, and that's why it's always down to the people. It comes down to the people and the grassroots to really fight and speak for us, and I've always believed in the people's power, and that's why we need to speak up about this internationally.
Yes, if I just might add, what Rosa was saying, one thing that she said is that finally it's all one common cause. With each particular case in Palestinian, Kurdistan or Catalonia, as the cases here, but as well we could talk about the Scottish people or the Irish, as one panelist has finally not been able to come. And is that we have to support each other. Internationalism, solidarity amongst people, is what will make us triumph in our causes, in our different causes, but again, by the end, they are all just one and the same cause. Just as Rosa was saying, that we believe that human rights exist for everyone, and we want those rights respected for everyone. As he was saying as well, just about being equal with your neighbor. Don't care who he is, what are his beliefs, where does he come from, or he or she. Just human rights and equality amongst peoples, and it's that we believe that defending our causes, we are fighting for this goal. And so I would like to again stress the importance of solidarity amongst people, amongst Palestinians, among Kurdish, amongst Catalan, Scottish, Irish, and just to show internationalism.
Yeah, I think in terms of morality, I think anybody who believes in human rights or equality or their own self-determination, they cannot deny it to others. And I think that that's important, that if I believe in something that I need, then other people might need that, maybe in a different way or different shape, in different place, and I would support them. The only problem with really working together as a united front is that the needs are different, and sometimes my need differs from a need in Kurdistan or in Catalan. So other than providing moral support in that case, I would be maybe wasting my time, putting too much effort into supporting something that I cannot influence when I have so much myself to do. So.
Well, I think the Palestinian or the Arabs had a lot of influence with the Kurdish cause, because the Arabs, not all of them, but a majority of the Arab states do not support the Kurdish people. And unfortunately, I have to say, as a Kurd, Israel has been the only state to have supported the Kurdish independence in south of Kurdistan. So that is not a good sign at all. I mean, the Arab countries could come out and advocate for Kurdish self-determination. And of course, the Kurdish people should come out as well and support the Palestinian people. So I think there is, and in the past, because I've read from our history, the Kurdish people, the PKK, and the Palestinian people have always been an ally. And since the movement have moved from the left, I have to say that the link have kind of been destroyed, because I have read about the Palestinian movement, and my father has always been giving blood to the Palestinian people when he was very young. So there's always a linkage between the Arabs and the Kurds.
Yeah, there is that. I mean, thank you for that. We do support each other. I said when we can. How do you do that? Formulate that is always difficult, because, as I said, most of campaigning is often reactionary. So you react to an event that happens somewhere that only affects you. When something else happens, if we can help with that, if something happened in Kurdistan. When I was young, the gathering of the Kurds in North Iraq, I was on the streets, campaigning for a punishment for the Iraqi system, even though I'm an Arab. That didn't mean anything to me. I'm saddened that there are so many Kurds now are shaking hands with Israelis and forgetting about the struggle of the Palestinians, having them achieved something in terms of autonomy. They have forgotten about the struggle that they had to get there, and abandoning the Palestinian to do their own struggle. And that to me is sad.
Personally, I do not agree with it. That's my view. And I've always supported the Palestinian people, and I've attended demonstrations in support of the Palestinian people. But as I mentioned, it's wrong, and it's basically Erdogan and Turkey and Israel are kind of equal to me, because they are repressing the people.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. If you believe in human rights and in equality, you don't change tact on politics. And that to me was where the leaders of Kurdistan who got to where they are actually believed in human rights, or just a nationalism element of their cycle that really got them to where they are.
As I explained at the start, the Kurdish issue is very complex, because the south of Kurdistan and the north and the east, they want different things.
It's something I want to ask you about, actually. Do you see self-determination in the four regions of Kurdistan, the Turk and the Iraqi, Iranian and Syrian, is it all the same self-determination, or do you see them as separate parts?
I want democratic confederalism. I think I mentioned it a few times in my speech. I think before the PKK and the Kurdish movement at the beginning, they wanted independence, and the ideology of Öcalan changed because he said that we cannot reach independence if we do not have direct democracy, if we do not have equal rights for women. Therefore, we need to achieve this and this autonomy before we can have any kind of state, because it would be a false state.
Yes. No, what I mean, do the people in the four regions see themselves as one nation that needs to be together, or they see themselves only with similarities of circumstances that they live in as occupied nations in different places?
Yeah, the Kurdish people believe, they know that they're divided within four countries at the moment. So they're in Iran, Syria, and Turkey. They know that, and they know they're all Kurdish. The dream is to be united, of course. No one has that. Always there is a dream of being united, but the thing is, we are divided between these countries.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, we'll take a few questions at once. So, guy at the back.
My name's David James, and I'm a reporter at CommonSpace.
Sorry, could you stand up so that I can hear you? I'm sorry, my hearing's not too good.
I think that was an interesting exchange, but it left me feeling that there was a lot, you know, the Palestinians and the Kurds are being murdered by their opponents. In Catalonia, it's not that bad, but leaders are being arrested, people are being beaten up for trying to cast a vote. And it's left me quite slightly frustrated that in this country, we don't face any of those problems. And the national movement has been ostensibly in power since 2007. And in all of that time, I don't know that Scotland has done very much. I don't mean the Scottish people, but the Scottish government, the nascent state here, has done very little to actually support self-determination movements around the world. Now, there have been some brighter moments. It was good, for example, when the SNP opposed the Iraq war. Because let's not forget, this is not just about people who are seeking independence and stuff like that. The right of nations to self-determination is also about opposition to imperialism in general. So, for example, when the West says that it's going to intervene in Venezuela and remove the elected government and put in someone who's not been voted for, that's an attack on the self-determination of a people. But the SNP contingent in Westminster is supporting those moves. And I actually feel like we're going in the wrong direction. I don't understand why we haven't developed a foreign policy which sees Scotland as aligned with the demand for self-determination, with the rights of small national groups around the world. Actually, no progress has been made in that direction in these last 12, 13 years, however long it is. And we used to have stronger movements in support of the Palestinians, I think. Actually, it's difficult to imagine today there were marches of 500,000 or 600,000 people in London at the time of Operation Cat's Leg, for example. And there has been a real attack on the Palestinian movement in the last couple of years, something I never thought I'd see. I never thought that that sentiment would be pushed back so hard by the attacks in the media, claiming that it's all anti-Semitism, by attacks from the political class and stuff like that. So I just want to ask people if they think there's scope, not scope in Scotland, to do much more than already is going on. For example, is there not space in Scottish civil society to have exile organisations here, Kurds and Palestinians, able to organise solidarity in their home countries here in Scotland? Could they not be given a safe legal space to do that? Is there not greater scope for more Palestinian, Kurdish and other countries, Catalonia, to have more ambassadors here, consulates, institutions? There's so much more that could be going on. Imagine, in Scotland, you know, let's be honest, whiter than white, right? It's a Western country, right in the heart of the Western world. So there's a big symbolic value in a country like Scotland, English-speaking, in the heart of the West, saying, no, we respect the rights of movements to self-determination. We respect Palestinian people, we respect their institutions, their governments, their right to democratic organisation. And it's frustrating that isn't something that's happened in Scotland when we have basically free rein to do it. We don't have all the powers in the world, but no one can stop us doing that. I just thought I'd put that in.
question. Can we take a few and then we'll go back to the panel yourself? Yeah?
I'm Neil Junior. I'm a member of Scottish Jews Against Zionism, and I had probably a simple statement to make, but now it's got all mixed up. Because the important thing is about the history. Rosa was talking about finding your identity, learning about the history of what your country is about. And I think social media is teaching our young people the history of what Britain has done, rather than hearing from imperialist fathers about how great Churchill was, blah, blah, blah. People are learning the truth in a way that they never did because it doesn't get taught in school. And actually we need to wake up and realise how much Britain has designed Israel before Israel was declared a state. The Zionists, the terrible Z word that I haven't heard yet, that is equated with anti-Semitism and the most vile abuse of what anti-Semitism actually is. Zionism formed an organisation, they formed in the late 1800s as a result of Russia expelling Jews. Now, they organised a charity called the Jewish National Fund, which was set up in 1901. It began gathering funds internationally, around the world, from every Jewish household and every Western government. And Britain were patrons of that charity all the way through to 1948. Now, Britain had a major part to play since the Balfour Declaration on Palestine in making, designing the whole business of ethnic cleansing. And they carried out ethnic cleansing in very basic forms, but as punitive as it is today, the fact is there's much more sophisticated armoury, there's much more sophisticated policies, and the mesh of profit through war has become almost undecipherable. I mean, and the fact that Israel, the Zionist government, backed any country that wanted to be left-wing. They backed Pinochet to murder his own people. So there's no surprise about Venezuela and seeing that they are wanting to be crushed. I better stop because I know you're cutting it.
We'll just take one more.
I'm aware with the trials going on in Catalonia at the moment that an end process of that, once it comes to a finish in Catalonia, might be taking an appeal to, I think, either the European Court of Human Rights or one of the other international bodies at that level. But specifically in relation to Afrin and other things that may have taken place in Kurdistan, which I'm not aware of, but I have certainly heard about. Afrin, I was one of the speakers at the Berlin Scottish Independence Rally, and literally the day after we started our march from Brandenburg Gate, there was a silent vigil for Afrin there. But obviously, I remember hearing about maybe the PLO on television in Australia when I was like 7. I hadn't kept a close eye on everything that's happened because it's been going on for such a long time in Palestine. But my question for both yourself and in relation to Palestine, what has been the general experience with international bodies like the International Criminal Court? And I think it's maybe not the exact name, but the International Court of either arbitration or adjudication in The Hague in relation to various things that have happened in both Kurdistan and Palestine over the years. And I guess looking to what sort of hope that we can have in these international bodies that were directly set up after all the atrocities that happened in Europe in 1945 and was supposed to prevent this kind of ethnic cleansing from happening again.
Great questions. We'll come back, we'll do another round, but I better answer those ones. So you've got, can the Scottish Government be doing a lot more? Can we do better education, British imperialism, and what about the international courts? Who wants to
Can we do more?
Yeah.
Yes, we should do more.
Yes.
I think educating the people really about international solidarity is very, very important. And I would say the question to James was, really, I feel like in Scotland, we are in a democratic country, while self-determination and the people are, it's not over 50% support of independence in this country. And I think the question goes back to maybe lack of involvement. The population is not involved, or they're not aware, or they're too busy with their own lives. I would say in the assemblies in Rojava in Syria, over 80% of the population are involved directly with direct democracy. So it's really, the politics is completely different over there, and how it actually works in practice. So, I mean, the Scottish Parliament doesn't have foreign policies. I would say that's one of the problems, because the Scottish government don't have powers over any foreign affairs. So that is something really hard to kind of argue for, because we just don't have the powers. But that does not mean that we should not make statements about showing solidarity internationally. So I think the Scottish government should do more, or can do more. I mean, I would say it's an excuse to say that we're busy with Brexit, or we're busy with this. I think international solidarity should always be in the forefront, no matter what it is that you're facing. It's that you're showing solidarity and making a statement. I would say the Scottish government have been very poor in showing solidarity with the Kurdish people, personally.
Yeah. Yourself?
Yeah. And the Scottish Parliament or Scottish Government, I think we have to remember that the SNP is a broad church. It is not a revolutionary party. It's a party that brings in a lot of people from different backgrounds, and the only thing that really connects them is the desire for an independent state. And within that independent state, when it does happen, you will probably find a lot of these people who will become conservative Scots, or Labour Scots, or Marxist Scots, or whatever it is. So that party is not really a homogeneous party. It's not a one ideology that brings everybody together, and that's why they avoid international kind of support, or so that they don't appear divided on anything. It's a very fine line that they follow in terms of international politics. We had our fights with them. I can tell you that until last month, a meeting with the deputy First Minister, when been working on a package for sixth form, seventh form school education on Palestine and Israel, that was approved, having been prepared by a lot of academics and experts on the subject. And the Zionists didn't like what's in the package, because it shows what Israel was when it was started, and on what basis, and what it has done to the Palestinians ever since. So they put pressure on the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister, and he pulled it out. He didn't want it in the curriculum, or in the space called like CommonSpace, but it's called what's that? GLOW. GLOW is the site that teachers can go in and pick up material for teaching their pupils. And it was taken out of that site because the Zionists put pressure on him. Rather than have principles, because he, as an individual, he believes that we should teach it, but because he had pressure and he didn't want any argument within the party about it, he was happy to take it out of the curriculum and forget about it. And we had our arguments with him about that. So the SNP, until you have a Scottish state, you have to deal with them as they come, unfortunately, and that's what they are. You put pressure on them, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. In terms of the International Criminal Court, one of the conditions of appealing to that court is to do it through a state, and because Palestine is not a state that is recognized internationally as an independent state, they can't use that court to take Israel there and get some redress. So there is now, with the Palestinian state becoming recognized by the General Assembly of the United Nations, but not by the Security Council, it does allow them to approach it as a state, but there's so much pressure from the parent members of the Security Council, like the UK and the US and France, to oppose any approach to the criminal court or international criminal court by the Palestinians, and the pressure is immense. So really, to be able to get there, you need to have some backing, some clout, to be able to actually convince judges, international judges, to take the case and look at it, because there is no such thing as a body. It's actually people who come from all over the place when they are needed to look at something and say, yes, there is a case to answer and we will take it on. So that is not there at the moment. We keep putting the pressure on to get there, and sometimes we get promises that something can be done, but the pressure is really immense from the big guns in this world. If you look at the Human Rights Council, the US pulled out of that council because at one point they passed a resolution in support of Palestine and calling Israel for what it is, as an apartheid state. So these brothers can't afford to have somebody like the US withdrawing from it, because its credibility, it's actually inability to act would be diminished if the big countries are not part of that, because it's the clout of the big countries that can put pressure on the smaller countries like Israel to behave itself. Without these big guns being part of that organization, it will become really just a token shop, and it won't achieve anything.
Do you take the next round, or do you want to add?
I was just going to add, very simple. The first question was about what people can actually do. Here we've been talking about what the government is doing, that I completely agree. It should do more, a lot more, in regard to every country that is going through a struggle right now. But I'd say, as citizens, as people, there are as well a lot of things that people can do, like attend demonstrations in solidarity with all our different movements and all more that are around the world, and not only for citizenship, for like state struggles, but for every struggle. All of them deserve solidarity, I think. And as well, another easy thing that, I learned once I arrived here, because in Spain politics are a bit different, is that I'm sure all of you can really go to your constituent representative, being it in Council, Holyrood or Westminster, and just ask, what are you doing, what is going on, what can you do to help to interest yourself in this struggle. And I think that's a really important thing to do. That's just my conclusion.
Can I add a little bit on that?
Right, very brief. We've got 10 minutes left, right? And there's more people want to ask questions. Could we do another round and then we'll come back to you? Is that okay?
That's fine, okay.
And then bring that point back up.
If I just sort of say something,
Go for it.
because I have to go, okay? But I think it might be relevant, okay? My name's Helen Kyle, and I was involved in a sit-in in this building, and we sat in here for 55 days when the council decided they were going to close the building without any negotiations with any of the people in the community, okay? So the reason I've interrupted this evening is because you've all had the same thing. But this is proof that community involvement can actually work. The community involvement at that time was that this was a community centre that was organised by the community council in Glasgow City Council, and they were losing money, and they went round and decided that we'd have to shut some buildings, okay, without any negotiations. And because this was a big building, they decided, oh, let's just shut that. We organised a sit-in, and most of the people that used this building were people who live in this community. But it was childcare, it was football, it was all the things that community and parents need for the children, and they didn't want to lose the building. So we organised ourselves and we sat in this building for 55 days without electricity, without water. That's a slight exaggeration, we're really quite clever. But we did that, okay, and after 55 days, negotiations happened, okay? And because I was a community development worker, we lived in the area, we were able to negotiate that the building should come to the community. That's why this building's here today, because local people took the action and wasn't frightened of actually getting around. That's a very Scottish word, by the way. And what I would like to say before I have to go is this. See that banner? That banner is an all-welcome banner that 25 women worked on for 6 months from a great range of communities and nationalities that live in this area, okay? And that is the all-welcome banner. So thank you for
Yeah. I'm going to do something, going to reverse things. I'm going to ask you guys, who will be able to make a case for self-determination to what used to be the engine of democracy in Great Britain, and particularly in Scotland. And here what I'm talking about is the trade union and labour movement. Because one of the things that's been absolutely criminal that we've had, you know, a great independence discussion and debate in Scotland, and the trade union movement has been nowhere. Been nowhere.
I agree.
Now, I'm going to say, you guys can make a better case to trade unionists in Scotland.
I've been a trade unionist. I am a trade unionist. That's very, very difficult to
because you
speak
see, right back, I think it was the Red Queen they called her, Barbara Castle. She began the first attack on the trade union movement. And we had a document called In Place of Strife, which Margaret Thatcher grasped to her bosom when she was elected and ran with it.
She was rubbish.
But she ran with it. She did. And what's actually happened, and if you actually look at all of the countries that have adopted the neoliberal outlook, they've all done the exact same thing. And incidentally, see if neoliberalism worked. Chile would be a powerhouse. Chile would be the leading country in the world, because whenever they overthrew the democratic government there, they put in the guru of neoliberalism, Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman, and he had a very good colleague in General Pinochet. And when Milton Friedman said, we need to stop those trade unionists from bothering us, General Pinochet organised the caravans of death. Right? So in actual fact, if neoliberalism actually worked, Chile would be a powerhouse. It would be a land of milk and honey. Go there, tell me if it is.
It is.
It's no. It's absolutely not.
So what's your question?
My question is this. Can I ask the comrades here to make their appeals to the Scottish trade union movement, to get them to stand up on their feet about self-determination, because they would need to be, they would be saying self-determination to Palestinians but not Scots, self-determination to Catalonia but not Scots, self-determination, that's what I'm saying. You can provide solidarity for us. I'm absolutely horrified. I'm horrified that we've got a government that was talking about if we get a fundamental and basic change, then we would. How would we all feel? I just asked the group here. How would we feel if the Westminster government went to war that the people of Scotland didn't agree with? Would we see that would be a
It's already happened. It's already happened. Why nothing happened?
Yes, our government, the Westminster government went to war in Syria, they illegally bombed Syria.
And Iraq.
Yes, they illegally did that. And Holly was absolutely silent. So anyway,
Right, no, it's a
that's
good
my question.
question,
My
Tam.
question is going to
Thank
use
you.
on.
Right, very last questions. You've had your hand up for ages. But brief.
Is about what you were saying about Netanyahu and how you feel the way he's behaving is playing into your hands. And I would really love to believe that that's the case. But what I feel is happening is that there's an attempt, and I think it's coming, to delegitimize any form of solidarity with the Palestinian movement. It's happening particularly in the United States. And certain terms make you an anti-Semite. For instance, saying that Israel is a fascist state. And that's not anti-Semitic. It may be incorrect because it's an apartheid state. It's quite clear. But people have a right to call it whatever they want and to engage in debate about it. And that, what's happening is people are now feeling frightened of engaging in discourse about what's happening in Palestine, which is an extreme case, but it's also true of the Kurdish situation. And the fact that information is, for instance, that the Turkish army attacking towns in the Kurdish areas in southeast of Turkey and destroying them. If you saw the pictures of what those towns were like, it was like it was like Gaza, and but nobody discussed it in the West. Everybody knew about it. The reporters must have known about it, but nothing was said. So there's a huge problem with for all three of you, but I think particularly Palestine, about getting information out and people being free to discuss these things and without being called certain names.
Thank you. And was it yourself, very last one?
Yeah, I was just wondering, open to all panels, but maybe particularly in the Catalan case, because it has similarities to the Scottish sort of autonomy movement, is how important languages to each of your causes and your movements. Because quite a odd thing about the Scottish movement is that we do have our own language, but no one really speaks it.
Well, you've been... Well, they've taken that right away from you, haven't they?
I know, but it's like...
I think...
But like, specifically in the Catalonian case, where a lot of people speak Catalan, how important is it to your side and to your cause? And to the movement?
Right, well, we answer these in just closing statements, and then we'll finish up if everyone's okay. We'll go a wee bit 5-10 minutes over. Do you want to go first?
Okay, yeah, you're okay. I'll start with this question. In the Catalan, very brief, I will be. In the Catalan struggle, our own culture, not only our language, but the culture on itself is very important for our struggle because it's what we identify for. What Rosa was saying before, where does she come from, who she is, for us is very important. And yeah, definitely, Catalan is crucial in all our struggle. And to be honest, when I first arrived here, what I knew about Scotland was, yes, well, they want to be independent as well. I came here in 2016, 2 years after the referendum. They have their own language, which is Gaelic, apart from Scots, okay, if you allow me. Yes, it really kind of impressed me because I wasn't expecting that your language, so Gaelic, was not a central part of the independence movement, because in Catalonia it certainly is. Is that in Catalonia, and as well related again with what he was saying before, people speak Catalan, people speak Spanish. I'm sure that every day everyone speaks both languages in different situations, but yeah, we do have this language and it's very important. So yeah, I hope I'm answering your answer. Now, trade unionist, it's very interesting as well, relating again to the Catalan case before answering what you were asking, and more specific way. In Catalonia, for example, trade unions have had an important part in our struggle. The most prominent example is the fire workers, the firemen that came out to defend the right to self-determinate, came out when there are images going around when the Spanish police came to polling stations to beat people up. Firemen defended, made human walls to defend people, and it was them as workers defending. Another very interesting case, and I love it. As you may know, there was a big boat, a hotel boat with Spanish policemen in Barcelona's harbor. And so the workers of the harbor the port decided that they would make their life there with the Spanish policemen very difficult. And how did they do that? For example, during the night, they let the sirens going on to let them not be able to sleep. Sorry if I rephrased that wrongly. Or for example, making it difficult for them to get food, not that they would die of starvation, but all the supplies that they would need. Just they made it difficult for them to ride it. And so I think that's very important. So workers, and of course all struggles have their social side, and it has to be the trade unions that really embrace this side. Here in Scotland, I'm afraid I don't know that much how is the situation. Of course, I'd love to talk with you a bit more about that. What I know is about the Catalan situation. I know that the STUC, the Scottish Trade Union Council, passed a motion in solidarity of the Catalan struggle and Catalan self-determination. Is that I don't really know, sorry, about what the situation in regards to the Scottish process and independence.
I can do that. In regards to, I'll answer that young gentleman answer about the language. The Kurdish language is essential to our movement. Unfortunately, there's two dialects in the Kurdish language. There's Kurdish Sorani and Kermanji. So really, it's kind of the Arab dialect. Maybe it changes from one country to another, but it's a bit slightly different. But I would say for the Scottish people, they're adding the Gaelic language is coming back to the education curriculum. It would take time probably for a new generation to learn, and kind of the encouraging families to really know this is their native language. But it's unfortunate because when I grew up in Scotland, and I was like, I speak kind of English language, but I'm in Scotland. I can go to Inverness, maybe you could actually speak Gaelic, but it's unfortunately, but that shows kind of ethnic cleansing can have different forms, it was explained. But going back to the trade union, STUC and TUC and many of the trade union, STUC has essentially been very supportive of Palestinian people and Catalan people and the Kurdish people. So they have spoken, and they have international motion spoken, and it shows solidarity in the conferences. However, when it comes to discussion about the Scottish independence, they are very silent about it, and they do not want to support it or be against it. They have no stance on that perspective. And it's very, very interesting to be in the trade union because there are many people in the trade union supports independence. And believed in the Scottish self-determination, and they voted yes. However, sometimes they do it behind doors. They're like, I support independence, don't tell anyone. So it is, I don't know how to break that barrier within the trade union in Scotland, but I think it needs to come from the trade unions themselves, and so many of them have come forward and been very pro-ND, and I think that's what trade union is, and trade unions should believe in their own people and what they want to achieve and what a better society they want to become. But I think it's going slowly from the trade union perspective. I hope I can answer. There was the international international like criminal law, and I think it was mentioned, we, the Kurdish people, don't have a seat, so it's very, very difficult when you don't have a seat in, say, the United Nations Security Council or the Assembly or so on. However, there's been cases being taken in Turkey, especially Kurdish cases, where people have been tortured, and there's evidence of the brutality against the Kurdish people. They've won cases in the international court, and they've been compensated. There's cases like that. However, it's very, very small, and it's minority of cases that they win. The other case was, I think it was Naomi was talking about the British state giving money to like states of really bringing oppression to people and blocking people's rights. It's actually happening right now as well. The British state is giving a lot of money to the Turkish state to stop refugees, to stop refugees to coming over to this country. However, this money, and I'm talking about a lot of money, is being given to the state, and they have used it for their own agendas and for their own campaigning party elections. So it's a lot of corruptions happening above us, and those people who are in power, they are abusing their powers, and the state is really responsible for it. Thank you.
Just the one on Palestine.
Well, if you've got time,
Okay.
keep it brief and then we'll finish.
Right.
Up.
I think the campaigns on Palestine have been working. If you have been working on these campaigns as long as I have for the last 30 plus years, you can see the difference of the 80s, 90s, 2000 and now. There is so much more understanding of the issues now. There is much more support on the ground for Palestine and Palestinian rights. Israel is so desperate, and unfortunately that support is not being translated into government policy changes, whatever country that support may be. And that's where we want to get to, is where the governments start reflecting the concerns that the people have on international issues. Governments don't do that very often. They reflect people's views on local issues, but not on international issues. So the international issues are left for the brainy politicians, between brackets. So, and they always claim that you don't understand the dynamics of international politics, and they actually patronize you into leaving the stuff to them. But there is movement on the ground that supports Palestine, and Israel knows it. And Israel actually risking an increase in international anti-Semitism by doing what they do in terms of accusing everybody of being anti-Semitic if they criticize Israel. That is a risky business. That makes anti-Semitism less important to them than having a state. So anti-Semitism can go on the rise, or can be ignored by most people as being a joke, because anybody who says Israel is anti-Semitic, so people stop giving too much attention and too much importance to anti-Semitism when it does happen in real life.
Which is another bad thing.
Sorry?
Which is another bad thing, because anti-Semitism is a form of racism.
It is, but I mean, if you diminish its meaning by accusing everybody of being anti-Semitic when they are not, then when it does actually happens, like crying wolf, when it actually happens, nobody will believe it's happening, because people will always start saying, oh, it's just Israel playing games. So they actually know that, and they are risking that game because they are worried about what you and others started to know about Israel-Palestine. Okay, so that's really, there is things happening, and when things happen, if we only need to get a couple of strong personality in politicians who can get to the top and start putting.
Can I ask you another question, very quickly?
As the chair.
Do you think that it will be like South Africa? Because you never
I hope
really
so.
answered the question that the one state. So that would be the one state solution.
I think eventually that's what will happen. Israel, although in numbers they have much more in demographic kind of balance than South Africa had with the whites and blacks. But eventually, the barriers of oppression will break, and they will break under international pressure. So we need that, what we call BDS, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions. So we need that in real life, although it will not break Israel in terms of economy, but it will break it in terms of international standing. And when it does break in international standing, there will be Israeli politicians who are willing to mend the fence, if you want to call it that, and allow Palestinians to be equal to whoever is in power. And that when things will change. Can I just have one last thing? It's very, very, very important. When you go to your politicians, especially the MSPs, and talk about the international issues that we talk about tonight, they will always say, we don't have a mandate on international issues. It's not a devolved power to talk about international problems or interfere in international issues. That is correct. What you can then ask them to do is to interfere as politicians on trade, on cooperation on health issues, cooperation on education, by having education about these issues in our schools in Scotland. All that are within the devolved powers of the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government. So we can do a lot in terms of doing trade with countries that are oppressed, like doing Catalan imports, helping Catalan businesses to develop their strategies, to develop their economy. All that can be done without being an international foreign policy. It can be an economic issue which is devolved. Education on Catalan, Kurdistan, Palestine can also be in the schools where young people can learn about it. Please do ask these questions. Don't be fooled by their standard answer. It is not a devolved issue. It is, and many of the life issues that we experience are within their remit to actually do something about.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we could stay here all night, Blathering, but we're going to have to wrap it. But maybe if you've still got questions, you can speak to the speakers at the end. Thanks so much, everyone coming. Brilliant event. Sign up to CommonSpace and see you next week.